Welcome to Third and Fairfax, the official podcast of the Writers Guild of America West. I'm your host, Brian Gary. In this episode's Uniontown segment, Writers Guild members turn out in force to the Many Crafts, One Fight rally on March 3rd in Encino to kick off crew unions negotiations with the AMPTP. The crew unions, IATSE, Teamsters, and the Hollywood Basic Crafts, were also joined by members of SAG-AFTRA, AFM, and the DGA for a multi-union rally of over 1,000 industry workers. Then Josephine Green Zhang talks with Mr. and Mrs. Smith co-creator and showrunner Francesca Sloane about her new Amazon series, creative process, her career, and more. Remember, you can listen and subscribe to our Third and Fairfax podcast on Spotify, Apple, or Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West's YouTube channel. And now for the Many Crafts, One Fight rally. Kicking us off, we have words of solidarity from the leaders of IATSE, Teamsters, Los Angeles Federation of Labor, AFM, California Federation of Labor, SAG-AFTRA, and our very own Vice President, Michelle Mulroney.
This is what solidarity looks like, right here.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Everybody knows if you work in production, this is what it looks like, working in the trenches together, right?
You are the backbone of Hollywood.
And everybody should know that the musicians are with you, and the musicians will be there for you, whatever you need, because that's the kind of solidarity I got from all of you.
My shirt says, strikes work. Because we saw they fucking worked last year, didn't they?
There is no entertainment industry without you. You are the set, and it's time you set the standards.
Good morning, Hollywood labor! WGA, let's show some love to our crews and crafts. I am proud to stand here today representing my fellow WGA members to bring a message of unwavering support to IATSE, Teamsters Local 399, LIUNA, IBEW Local 40, and UA 78 on the eve of your critical negotiations.
Now let's hear from a few WGA members in the crowd on why they are committed to showing up for the crew.
Hey, I'm Andra, and this is Christina Wu. We're here at the Teamsters and IATSE's rally for their contract negotiations kickoff, and we're here because we would never not be here. There are so many people here who I know from our strike who stood by us and were really important allies with us. We know the power of labor standing together, and that's why I'm here.
All these people came out for us to support us in our strike. It's literally the least we could do for them. We couldn't do our jobs without them. They couldn't do our jobs without us. Our strike effort lasted a long time last year, so truly, it's the least we can do to come out and show support for them and their cause.
Stay strong, be brave, you make everything go, and so don't be afraid to stand in your power. We are with you, and we're not going anywhere.
I think management likes to try to confuse labor. They like to blame labor. They like to use us as scapegoats, and I would just say, do not let them do that. Asking for things like better pay and safety on set is not crazy. It's normal and it should be given. So yeah, I think I echo Andra, stay strong.
Here at the rally in support of the crew and other unions, in solidarity, which is so important, which I learned during our strike, how good it felt to see other people showing up for us, and how much it matters for us all to partner together. So of course, we're out here to let them know we got their backs just like they had ours.
Being here as a WGA member, it's a good reminder that this fight is not just one union, it's multiple unions, and it's #OneU. It's solidarity all around, and that what happens to one worker affects all workers.
It actually feels great being out here. I honestly expected a pretty good-sized turnout. but this exceeded my expectations. There are unions here, frankly, that I wasn't even aware existed, or at least different locals, and they're all out here, they're all represented. I think everybody understands that nothing moves without the crew, so seeing this level of support is pretty incredible.
Those were WGA West members Andra Whipple, Christina Wu, John Terry Gadsden, Janine Wong, and board member Eric Haywood. Now, let's go back to Vice President Michelle Maroney.
We all know, and the AMPTP should know by now, that Hollywood labor has never been more united. We know that using power builds power, and that our continuing solidarity is the only effective response to unchecked corporate greed. During last year's strike, the selfless solidarity you all showed humbled us every single day, and it sustained us through our long and arduous fight. I know I speak for every single WGA member when I say we will never forget the sacrifices you made. Even as writers, it's hard to find the words to express the depth of our gratitude. But the best way is to say loudly and proudly that the WGA has your backs. And we will stand with you every step of the way in your fight. Now, you may be known as the basic crafts, but let's be real here. There is nothing basic about what you do. Without all of you, our words would just languish on the page. You bring the stories to life that generate billions of dollars in revenue for these companies by virtue of the incredible skill, artistry, and commitment you all bring to your work. The crews and crafts are clearly the backbone of this industry, and it's time for the AMPTP to recognize the immense value of your contributions by giving you the fair deal you deserve. As for the AMPTP, we know what you did last summer. Their stalling forced 2 unions out on strike. Then their months of stonewalling prolonged those strikes unnecessarily. What is it they say about the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result? The AMPTP's tactics didn't work last year, and they're not gonna work now. What you are asking for in this negotiation is fair. Don't let anyone tell you you're being unreasonable. Diversified funding for your pension plans is reasonable. Protections for your health benefits are reasonable. Protecting and preserving jobs is reasonable. Safety in the workplace is reasonable. Now, the WGA is not afraid to fight when the cause is right. And you know what? Game recognizes game. We see the fight in all of you. We see how clear-eyed you are about what you need and deserve. Nobody should be underestimating your power and resolve as you enter these negotiations. So stay strong, knowing that your union family is by your side to the end, come what may. Solidarity now and solidarity forever.
You just heard a recap of the Many Crafts One Fight rally. Next up, Josephine Green Zhang speaks with Mr. and Mrs. Smith co-creator and showrunner Francesca Sloane.
Hi, this is Josephine Green Jang with Third and Fairfax podcast. I have today with us the co-creator and showrunner of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Francesca Sloane. Welcome. So
Thank you.
glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So I'll just get right in. Now, this show, Mr. and Mrs. Smith on Amazon Prime, just for those out there who don't know the log line, it's about two strangers, and I'm ripping this off from Wikipedia, okay? So,
Baby.
So it's about two strangers who independently agree to become secret agents for a mysterious organization undercover as a married couple using the names John and Jane Smith. I think that's all built into the title. They have to work through their missions as espionage, and as their espionage skills and developing relationship are put to the test. This is the strangest synopsis I've ever read. Okay, it's a remake of the Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie film that we all know and love. And yeah, just starting off with that, what was that like to get the call for this project? And can you walk us through this story of how the origin story of you coming on board?
Absolutely. So I had written on Atlanta, which for me was like the dream gig. It had been my favorite show. And then it kind of had that hiatus and it came back for the last 2 seasons. From there, I had obviously met Donald and we connected right away. He had expressed to me, he was like, at some point we should totally work on something together. And at the time, not knowing him as well, I wasn't sure if that was just sort of lip service or just like sort of a nice idea. I didn't realize that when Donald says something, he like fully means it, which is now what I've learned and becoming really close with him. But at the time, I didn't know that. And so I had started developing some other things at Amazon and landed a deal there. He had, kind of gone off from FX and had created a home on Amazon as well. So it felt even more tangible and real. We just didn't know what we wanted to do. And then it was one of the hottest days in 2020 during like the height of the pandemic. And he had called me, and I kind of have said this a few times now in some interviews, but he said, "Hey, like, do you want to make Mr. and Mrs. Smith a TV series?" And I started laughing, only because I thought he was joking around. I thought it was like a random weird Donald Glover joke, but he was completely serious. And the reason I thought he was kidding is I just didn't know why he would think that I would be the right person to tell that story, just because the movie's great. It's a lot of fun. It's very poppy. It just didn't feel necessarily like my sensibilities. But once we started talking about how we could make it, how it could really be sort of this reflection on intimacy and marriage and what it takes to kind of keep a marriage going, how hard it actually is, take the fun of an action genre and then actually live in sort of in-between moments. That started to feel really exciting. And that did feel like something that made sense for us to write.
And was it at any point difficult for you to let go of the original blockbuster film? Like, what were some of the challenges facing in how to stay true between balancing that adaptation, what it was, versus like what you want it to become?
I mean, maybe this was a bit naive and maybe even partially irresponsible. I think the film is fantastic for what it is, but no, I think we were excited to do something very different. I think that was part of the drive and part of the pull of the entire experience. You want to make sure that you're still telling something that's satisfying and good, and you're not doing it to sort of ruffle feathers. But for me, there's no point in taking on a story and sort of leading the command and the ship of it if it doesn't inherently make sense to you as an artist. So the only way to sort of do it our way was to truly pivot, and that's what we ended up doing.
Oh, I want to backtrack a little bit. I want to come back to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, but I just usually start with this, so I want to get back to how did you start as a storyteller? Like, what made you want to become a writer?
Yeah, I love that question just because it's like such a sweet and dreamy question, and everybody has such a unique answer for it, but there's always like some level of an overlap. And one of the things that I've noticed as an overlap is like weirdo kids, which is like really wonderful. I was a really weird kid and I was a really shy kid. And I think nowadays, if I had been sort of diagnosed in some way, I had selective mutism, where I would literally not speak at all except when I was at home and comfortable, because I was so busy and intrigued by sort of taking in the world, internalizing it, watching people almost as characters navigating things. Every small moment felt really profound to me. And so when I started to be able to read and write, I immediately started writing stories. It was just always part of my making. It was sort of my outlet. It was the way that my imagination could run wild. And so that was something that I had always done. Now, I never considered being a professional writer ever. It's sort of my journey kind of very naturally progressed into that way. But I didn't ever, coming from a family that doesn't have a lot of money, dreaming about a career while using your imagination as a way to pay the bills just didn't seem necessarily tangible for me. But, through the course of life, it led me down that road.
So then what was your aha moment and your first professional job, and then what was that transition like for you?
So I had moved in 2008 to attend CalArts. My parents were very big on education, and I knew that I needed to go to a school. Nobody was exceptionally thrilled that, a non-trust fund kid was going to an art school in Los Angeles in order to pursue education. But I had always loved making things. I liked making films. CalArts was exceptionally experimental, which kind of drove me even further away from what you would consider a conventional narrative screenwriting career. I did a lot of experimental work and things like that. And yet, there was this fantastic professor, Nicole Panter, who taught a screenwriting course, and I did find myself yet again gravitating toward writing narrative stories. Anyway, jump forward and you graduate from school, you're sort of lost. And I truly just lived the life of taking any job that I could under the sun to pay the bills. I worked at Universal Studios, testing, asking people if they wanted to try granola or hand soap. I cleaned toilets. I worked at donut shops. I was assistants for this person and that person. I was a nanny. Really just because I started to fall in love with Los Angeles. I liked how many dreamers there were. There was something, I liked how everybody was constantly trying to make something. All of that felt really good. I went to UCLA for my master's because my intention was to eventually teach. I thought, okay, maybe one day I can teach. I won a contest from UCLA, a writing contest, which ended up getting me all of these meetings with people from the industry, managers, agents. My manager, who I hired in the room despite advice, is a man named David Katzman, who it was his idea to put me and try out for writers' rooms. I had never considered that before. My first job was for a Sony Crackle show called Startup. And on day one of finally landing that job after some obstacles and hoops to jump through, I felt so comfortable for the first time in my entire life, where I was able to sit around with a bunch of people building worlds, talking about characters. It felt like I had arrived home, and I know that's really cheesy, but from then on, I realized that that's the only thing I could actually do in a way to be truly happy. And I kind of just continued forward doing that ever since.
And do you feel like there's a through line in the kinds of projects that you've worked on, and that, from what kinds of projects are you attracted to? And do you feel like thematically there's a through line in all of your different kinds of work?
I feel like I definitely love stories that are about underdogs. I really feel like sort of showing things and saying things that sometimes you're afraid to say, like kind of playing a little bit with fire in terms of what you're able to get your characters to do or say is always a lot of fun for me. But I do think I've written on so many different kinds of shows. I actually don't necessarily know if there is consistency outside of that, outside of, really wanting to show things that feel authentic, even if things are stylized. But it's all over the place. It's like there's Startup in 7 Seconds, there's Going to Mars show with The First, there's Fargo and Atlanta. They're kind of all over the place. But I think at this point, for me, I like to create a little trouble, but I also like things to mean something. I like characters with some heart. I think that's sort of my happy place now. And I like making people laugh in ways that are maybe slightly uncomfortable.
So there's some big scenes we have. Just wanting to ask what was the decision-making process and where to start and have that big opening and nod to the original film?
Yeah, I think we wanted to start off the show with a bang. We wanted it to obviously sort of highlight some of the stakes and emotional consequences and curiosities of what can happen to a Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But then we also wanted to be like, a little bit cheeky in the sense if we cast this with these two gorgeous people, which is Asa Gonzalez and Alex Skarsgård, which are two of the hottest people on the planet, you would think of them outright as a Mr. and Mrs. Smith on par in some way with like a Brad and an Angelina. But because, we're sort of the naughty kids, it's Hiro Murai, it's Donald Glover, it's myself, getting you invested in these people and then taking them down and killing them within 5 minutes is sort of this idea of this could have been the show you would have expected in the hands of other creators, but you handed it to us, and we're going to take something like that, kind of kill it, and then reveal our John and Jane moments later with this bizarre high machine and nail clippings with, a Maya Erskine as our Jane and a Donald Glover as our John. And that's actually the approach that we're creatively taking. And so you're telling the story that deserves to be told in a very genuine way, about this company, about the peril of joining this company. But then you're also sort of doing a little bit of a punk move and saying, haha, it's actually going to be this direction instead.
And when you were, coming up with the world building of this, of the show, at what point did you come up with the Mr. and Mrs. Smith's conceit are everywhere and they're and departed from the original? And like, was that what really sort of opened up the rest of the series to you?
We came up with that idea. We knew that we always sort of wanted to hit these relationship milestones. And we started talking about two different things in the room. On one end, we thought about action tropes and missions and locations that felt really satisfying in sort of the spy genre action world. And then on the other hand, we had relationship milestones and things that you sort of encounter as a first-time couple. One of them was a double date. When you're like finally meeting another couple that you then end up internally or outwardly comparing yourself to them with your partner. And we thought, how fun would that be if they're actually doing that by way of, a work date? And you can only do that if you have another John and another Jane Smith. And so it actually started with this double date idea. And then we thought, what a glorious way to give all of this intel about the company by way of what feels like a casual dinner party that's actually very loaded. And then that sort of opened up the universe to us of Smiths could be anybody and they could be anywhere. And that felt really exciting to tell that story.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, you kind of walked me through it a little bit, but like that made me think of, blue skying and opening up some of the process that you may have had in the room. And could you walk us through like how you, what on top you did it a little bit, but also like how you broke story in the room and like, did you do it by character a little bit as you progressed, or like you said, some of these moments in a relationship?
Yeah, I think the first few weeks of the room was really about the alchemy of everybody sort of feeling each other out and getting along. So it was a lot of parlor style discussions and anecdotes from your own life about your own relationship and stories of when you felt really vulnerable and stories where you could really laugh at yourself. Because to us, the real heart was John and Jane falling for each other and getting to know one another and having to work hard to be close to each other. And then the action, although it was very important to us and the spy story was very important to us, it could only work and could only feel fresh if it was always anchored in the relationship. So we started off there. And then we did start thinking of sort of, boy meets girl, they fall for each other, things start to get messy, because we wanted to get to the point where we could earn the conceit of the film, which is that these two people could end up having to take each other out. But how can you get there in a way that feels as believable as possible within the real estate that we had? And so we really first, came up with the arc of the relationship. And then we figured out this little formula of making missions of the week then inform the status of their relationship based on how they navigate these missions. Early days, we thought, well, if at one point they have to protect some kind of overgrown baby man, it's almost like they're dealing with a toddler. That could potentially bring up a question of, do you want kids? And we sort of just kind of took that idea for the entire season.
Mm-mm. I love the little moments too of bringing in John, I wanted his real name, Mike, John's like mother-in-law and their inclusion as well. And I wanted to ask you specifically about why The Prophet was the book The Prophet was featured so throughout and became a point of contention, and what how you came up with that idea and what that may have meant to the series.
Sure. I mean, in general, which you also just spoke on, we wanted to create little seeds that then blossomed and got planted. We had other ones too, that some that ended up on screen, some that didn't, but really thinking about showing how time can pass with these seeds being planted. Now, in terms of choosing The Prophet, we like the notion of it feeling like this throwaway thing that then turns into something so much bigger later on. But why The Prophet? I had always loved it. I had a lot of romantic ties to it. And then an anecdote about Donald, which, he had expressed that early days when he had met Mish, who is now his wife. One of their moments of connection was him laying with his head in her lap and then reading passages from the prophet. And so we both had these like sweet emotional connections to it. But then I also loved this passage about joy and sorrow and how those two things are one and the same. And I feel like that says so much about marriage and about being close to someone and just about humanity as a whole. And that kind of became a really good theme for something that kind of goes throughout the season. So it just felt appropriate.
Just because I'm mixed race, I'm Asian and white, and I'm actually in an interracial marriage, and my husband's in an interracial marriage. And I know that this is like, it just happens to be, that's something I love about this, that it is about an interracial love story without like always being about that. What were some of the discussions and your intentions about interracial love stories with, we don't get to see on screen that much about a Black and mixed Asian American woman, and, what were some of the conversations like in the room? And I love how in the episode, one of the missions, you so definitely discuss it, and just want to hear about how that break went.
Yeah, I love that question, and I love that that's something that spoke to you personally. I mean, I also am I'm in an interracial relationship. I am also interracial myself. I feel like the room was cast in a way where it was completely just based on merit. I just wanted really cool, interesting women who were also really fantastic writers, and they all ended up being women of color. So those conversations felt really natural for us, and where it felt very much honest and true. And Donald and I, like part of our friendship, especially in writing the show with each other, was not only bringing up our own individual personal stories from our own relationships, but even the way that the two of us deal with each other. It's a partnership too. Reading each other, making fun of each other, poking fun at one another in this way that John and Jane do just felt very real to all of us. And the fact that it felt like a fresh take is just icing on the cake, so that it was a very organic place for us to take our characters, and a place that felt really cool to do too.
I love that. Do you see in season 2 exploring Jane's background, her Japanese background more? Because I think in season 1 we get a sense really of John's mother and his background too. I know you may not have the answer to that, but just something I'm curious.
If we're lucky and fortunate enough to get a season 2, and if we bring Maya back as Jane, big questions. I think that would be really
Yes.
interesting a really interesting place to go. I think in general, like identity for both of these characters, especially coming into a world where they have given up their identities and we know so little about them, is part of what was so inspiring and challenging and interesting to speak on these two characters in the first place. Is how do you bring two people who have just left everything behind without letting us tell you everything about them straight away? So yeah, I think some more exploration. The truth serum was just the start of that. You can go so far with that if you really wanted to, and I think that would be fun for us.
I want to ask you, just what was your what was your favorite scene to write, and what was your most challenging scene to write?
Oh, they're the same, which is funny.
Yeah.
The most challenging, okay, they're sort of not the same. All of the action stuff was the most challenging for me just because it's so out of my wheelhouse. But emotionally challenging and also favorite is that there's an argument in the couples therapy episode in the woods where the two of them really sling mud at each other and really go below the belt, and it's really raw and it's really painful. I had written a version of that on my own, which was really tough. But then on the day of, I was able to sort of collaborate with Donald, Maya, and Amy Simons, who directed that episode. And we got to really think about how to hurt each other, and what they would say to really hurt one another. And it was truly emotionally draining for everybody, including myself. But I also felt like that was one of the more honest moments in the series. And that always excites me. And seeing what it brought out in Donald and Maya in terms of their acting, I was so blown away. I had to like check in with them afterwards and make sure that they weren't actually angry with each other because of how real it all felt. We were all raw nerves by the end of it, and that was a lot for everyone, but it was also incredibly satisfying.
Off that, because you mentioned that the spy action thrillers are a little bit out of your wheelhouse. So what were some of the inspirations, some books or movies and shows that you watched as inspiration to prep for this as research?
A lot of French Connection, especially in terms of the pilot, a lot of Hitchcock. We did watch, we watched a lot of Mission Impossible and all of the Bonds, the Bond franchise, just to sort of get a sense of where we could sort of play with those things versus not. But then I also just like to watch a lot of movies like The Conversation and Elaine May's Mikey and Nikki, of understated ways of actually doing things that were in that genre without big action spectacle pieces, and how that felt. And then picking and choosing when you wanted popcorn moments and when you wanted restrained moments. But yeah, I was very heavily inspired by films and movies from the 70s in terms of that.
You could really feel that. This is a little off tangent from writing, but I was just I rewatched the finale, the final episode. What do we say now in streaming? The finale, and I just love the music. I thought it was just so like. I was just curious, what was your process like working with the composer? Because it was most all instrumental, a little like electronic feeling, but it always just really complemented all the action scenes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have.
No, I love that. Dave will be so happy. We have a really talented composer, and one of the things that we sort of tried to explain to him early on that he seemed to connect with immediately is like, make an action film for the art school nerds. What could that sound like? And I really do feel like in a lot of ways, whether it's intentionally or if it's just sort of seeped into our subconscious or something like that, it really feels sort of like a low-key anthem to my generation, Donald's generation, Hero's generation. So like having a little bit of a 90s vibe of the kind of music we would have listened to growing up just felt very natural. And Dave kind of tapped into that. And so that's sort of where I think the inspiration came from. Even if it was not outright or overt, that's sort of what it evolved into.
And I could on a related tangent too, like I feel I just can't leave alone the set the interior design, just like everything had such a look to it. And when you were writing, was this like, how much of it was built out and how much collaboration, and just wanted it to talk a little bit about the look and aesthetic and how that was in the writing too as well.
It was very much in the writing. I appreciate that you feel that way about it. One of the first things that Donald and I really discussed was the why of why these two people would come into this, and what could a fantasy look like, and like a conjoint brownstone in the middle of New York that looks like that and has those things, especially right after the pandemic where you're spending so much time at home. So we just sort of let our imaginations run wild. Like, what would you want? What would you want? Donald brought up, he created this water bar that's just like the most ridiculous in the most fantastic way, because it's just so stupid that we loved it so much, of just like a gorgeous, almost like soda fountain water bar of just different kinds of like mountain spring water and like elite water companies. And you could, so if you like want your Aquapana, or you want your Fiji, or you want your sparkling, there's just like, we're like, that kind of is where it started. And then the water bar inspired the rest of its gloriousness. But the idea was also to show that after time, some of those extravagant things lose their shine. Like, we had this idea of the water bar starts being empty, and then it's just like taking up space, and it's just really annoying because you can't get a glass of water because this thing hasn't been refilled with the fancy filter or whatever. So yeah, we worked in great collaboration with Hero in terms of the first block of the show, and then Jerry, who we love, Jerry Sullivan, did such an incredible job of sort of taking our ideas and bringing them to life. But yeah, it was a big part of the writing, because the fantasy of that and the domestic love of wanting to create a nest with somebody was a big part and a character of the series.
It really, you saying that really makes me think of how the design is so character motivated, because it's so much about why would people become killers,
Right.
but but the payoff is just this huge luxurious house that is so, it's just a fantasy, but it's also super grounded,
Right.
as to a real need.
Right.
Why do people get married? For some kind of, domestic safety. In a way, it's modern throwback to the to the Brad and Angelina fighting in a home goods store.
And they had this incredible house, and they, we wanted a nod to that, where they then destroy, their house, which is a visual metaphor of them taking down the marriage. And in general, like, if you think about many of the things that we do in terms of our careers, or the choices that we make to want that brownstone, it felt like a real tangible desire to explore.
Mm-hmm. And poking fun at it with the Paul Dano's Moby Dick of it all.
Nothing more New York than the whole thing secretly being about real estate,
Oh man. Well, I like to end with a quick James Lipton for writers, a rapid speed round. So I'd love to ask you a quick round of questions, and this has been a pleasure. So I'll just dive right in. Francesca, what's your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt, or would have liked to attempt?
Ooh, psychiatrist.
Favorite snack in a movie theater?
Popcorn.
Favorite show? What are you watching right now, and then of all time?
The Curse and The Sopranos.
And favorite film right now, or most recent, and of all time?
Most recent, I really liked May December. It took me by surprise. Of all time, this is a weird answer, but it's a cross and a fight between Rosemary's Baby. I know Polanski is a jerk, but that movie changed my life. And Y Tu Mamá También.
Y Tu Mamá También is one of my favorite too. That was my rapid round. Oh, if there's a favorite character, fictional, that has inspired you of all time.
Okay, this is a weird one because I don't relate to him at all, because he's like a handsome white man, but I love Don Draper. I felt hard with Don Draper. Yeah.
And that comes through in Mr. and Mrs. Smith. It really does. It all makes sense now. Yes. Is there any, so just to everybody listening to Third and Fairfax, check out Mr. and Mrs. Smith on Amazon Prime. Is there a social media where we can follow, or updates, or you can also be like, no social media.
I have one now. Like I was never a big social media person. They just put the check mark next to my name, which I don't even know what that means. Whatever, F_Sloane. But I'm not a big social media person, I think. But yeah, I mean, watch the show. That's really the way to do it, and keep your fingers crossed for a season 2, because we would all love to have one. And I just appreciate that. Thank you for watching it all the way until the end at all. And thank you so much also for taking the time with me and for liking it. It surprises me every time that people are watching it. It surprises me even more that people like it, but it makes me very, very happy.
It's such a fun, fresh take on the spy genre. Thank you for being here at the Third Unfair Facts podcast. I'm gonna be a little selfish and plug my short film, Wabi Sabi the film, on Instagram. Just indie filmmaker, because it's also about an interracial.
Oh my God, I'm gonna check that out. That sounds awesome. I love the name. Also, that's such a
thank
good name
you
for a film. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, it's also, I'm a former I'm a recovering maximalist. So, learning about Wabi Sabi and watching Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Oh my God.
That was a word that I used a lot. So I feel you. I hope that recovery is going well, because it's an expensive one.
This was so awesome, Francesca. I can't wait till fingers crossed, and we can't wait to have you again on the podcast sometime for your next show too.
I love that. Thank you so much again for taking the time to talk to me, and thanks for asking me my favorite curse word. That was fun.
It's very important. It's character.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Third and Fairfax. Subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple, or Libsyn, and watch us on the Writers Guild of America West's YouTube channel. Also check out writtenby.com, the Guild's online publication, for more on writer craft, career, and union life. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.